Graduation night, amidst the clinking glasses and confetti, my parents pushed a $100,000 envelope toward my twin, toward me. They pushed a thin smile. Be realistic. They labeled my idea a failure, a sticker for my forehead. What they didn't know, I'd spent a year preparing for them to say that, and I'd already set the mirror for them to see themselves. In public. I didn't need their money. I just needed the truth to arrive on time. My name is Arden Vale, and at 25, I was holding a summa cum laude degree in finance and control systems that felt as heavy and useless as a cold brick. The restaurant was the Stonebrook Grill in Westvale. It was the kind of place that defined suburban success: dark wood, dim yellow lighting that made everyone look jaundiced, and a faint, persistent smell of seared steak and spilled wine. On a large projector screen above the bar, a looping slideshow of our college moments played. Click, Harper, my twin sister, laughing at a tailgate, red Solo cup in hand. Click, Harper accepting a business pitch award. Click, me, slightly out of focus, in the background of a group shot at the library. The entire evening was a performance, and I was just scenery. I clutched the padded leather folder containing my diploma. 4 years of 18-hour days, of tracing algorithms, of mastering the intricate, brutal architecture of corporate law and financial leverage. I had built a fortress of knowledge, and all I had to show for it was a seat at a dim table. Listening to my family celebrate the exact opposite. My father, Richard Vale, tapped his glass with a knife. The sound was sharp, cutting through the restaurant's murmur. "A toast," he said, his voice resonating with the practiced confidence of a man who runs a family fund. To the future, to vision, to the courage to build something from nothing. My mother, Eleanor, smiled. It was her perfectly curated public relations smile, the one she used for charity galas and difficult board members. She slid a thick, cream-colored envelope across the polished table. It stopped directly in front of Harper. $100,000, my father announced, just loud enough for the adjacent tables to hear. For your startup, for Halo Sip, we believe in you. Harper. Harper performed her surprise beautifully, a delicate hand to her chest, a manufactured gasp. Mom, Dad, I don't know what to say. This is... Halo Sip will be everything, I promise. The air at the table felt thick and still. I watched a drop of condensation slide down my water glass. I waited. 1 beat, 2, the silence stretched, becoming its own entity. Finally, I had to break it. And for me? The words were quiet, but they landed like stones. My mother laughed first. It was a light, airy sound, like tinkling glass, and it was designed to dismiss. "Oh, Arden, darling." She only called me darling when she was about to deliver a verdict. "You have your degree. That's the reward." She leaned forward, her expression shifting to one of gentle, patronizing concern. "You need a real job, sweetheart, not these daydreams. You have a brilliant, practical mind. Use it. We need one of you to be grounded." Grounded, like a circuit overloaded and shut down, like a body put in the earth. My Aunt Lydia, my mother's echo, immediately raised her champagne flute. "A toast," she chimed, her eyes glittering, "to the genius of the family." Her gaze swept toward Harper, then flicked to me, lingered for a half-second, and slid right off, as if my face was a slick surface that offered no purchase, as if I were nothing more than the edge of the table. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I didn't need to look. I knew what it was. I pulled it out and placed it face down on the white linen tablecloth. The black Gorilla Glass screen reflected the dim restaurant lights, a dark, empty mirror. On that dark screen, I pictured the email that had arrived at 8:14 a.m. Just as I was ironing my graduation gown, a confirmation from the Westvale Secretary of State. Financing Statement, UCC1, filed. Debtor, Halo Sip, LLC, Secured Party, Gray Quill SPV. While they were celebrating Harper's vision, I had been formalizing my security interest. While they were applauding her dream, I was collateralizing it. Harper leaned in, close enough for me to be suffocated by her perfume. It was a custom blend, heavy on bitter orange and neroli, and it always smelled thick, like expensive, weaponized syrup. It was the scent of her entitlement. "Try not to be bitter, Artie," she whispered, using the childhood nickname that always felt like a diminishment. She smiled, her eyes searching mine for the hurt. She needed to see the hurt. It was the final ingredient for her perfect night. I forced my lips into a small, tight smile, the kind of smile I'd learned to use in boardrooms when a VP tried to explain away a budgetary discrepancy. It was a smile that didn't reach my eyes. It wasn't meant to. "I'm not bitter, Harper," I said, my voice even. "I'm patient. Patience is a control system. Patience is an asset class. Bitterness is an emotional liability. And I'd spent 4 years learning to arbitrage it out of my system." She searched my face for another moment, confused by the lack of tears, and then turned back to the adulation. My father delivered the final line of the play. He looked at me, not with malice, but with a deep, profound, and misplaced pity that stung more than any insult. "Failure is a good teacher, Arden," he said, his voice full of paternal wisdom. "It's important to learn what you're not. Now you can focus on what you are, a fantastic analyst." Failure. He said the word. He branded me with it. Right there between the breadbasket and the melting butter. They had given Harper $100,000 to succeed. They had given me a label. I picked up the cheap, silver-plated ballpoint pen from the restaurant's leather bill folder, on my white paper napkin, damp from the condensation of my water glass. I wrote one word. Teacher. I folded the napkin slowly. Once, twice, the fibers creased under my fingernail. I tucked it into the pocket of my blazer. It was a receipt. It was the acknowledgement of a debt. They thought they were teaching me a lesson. They had no idea I was the one taking notes. The waiter, oblivious, materialized at my elbow. "Can I interest anyone in dessert? We have a wonderful chocolate lava cake, or our signature crème brûlée." "The lava cake," Harper and my mother said in unison. I slid my chair back. The wooden legs scraped against the floor, a sound as loud and abrasive as a scream in the quiet room. "Arden, where are you going? We're having dessert." My mother's voice was sharp, annoyed. I was ruining the final scene. "I have to work," I said. I stood up, buttoning my blazer. The napkin in my pocket felt heavy, like a stone. "Work? Tonight?" my father asked, frowning. "It's your graduation. It's a celebration." "Just tying up some loose ends." I didn't look at any of them. I looked at the dark window, at the faint, ghostly reflection of the table, my family celebrating, and me, a shadow, already walking away. I walked out of the Stonebrook Grill. I didn't look back. The cool, damp Westvale air felt clean, washing the smell of steak and bitter orange from my lungs. My car, a 3-year-old sedan, was parked in the back of the lot. It was practical. It was reliable. It was paid for in cash from 3 internships they told me were beneath a veil. I didn't drive home. I drove to the small, anonymous office building on the other side of the river, where the rents were cheaper. The light in the hallway was a sickly fluorescent green, Suite 305. The name on the frosted glass was barely visible. Vireo Ledger. Inside, the office was Spartan. A steel desk, a chair, a humming server rack in the corner, and against the far wall, a matte black, fireproof safe. I entered the code, 0418, the date, 2 years ago, when my parents had funded Harper's last failed venture, a subscription box for artisanal moss, which I had quietly liquidated at a 92% loss to avoid a lawsuit. The heavy door swung open with a quiet thud. Inside, there was no cash. There was only a single, thick, accordion file. I pulled it out and laid it on the desk. This was the key. Not a dream, not a gift. A set of contracts. The signed, notarized debt agreements from 2 of HaloSip's primary and critically unpaid suppliers, a glass bottle manufacturer and a specialty chemical provider, debts I had purchased at 40 cents on the dollar, through the shell of gray quill. I touched the raised seal on the top document. The key to the entire thing wasn't in a safe, it was in Article 9 of the Uniform Commercial Code. I left the restaurant before the lava cake arrived. I left them to their celebration, to their story of the genius and the failure. They thought they had written my future. They didn't realize I had already redlined the contract. In the Vale family, there was an unwritten ironclad law. Harper was the future. I was the ballast. Harper was the asset, the high-growth venture. I was the treasury bond, the stable, boring, low-yield necessity that kept the portfolio balanced. My entire life had been a masterclass in this dynamic. Our parents weren't just parents. They were portfolio managers. My father, Richard, ran Vale Holdings, a boutique family fund that managed the wealth of 2 generations. He lived in a world of risk assessment, leveraged buyouts, and projected ROIs. My mother, Eleanor, was the other half of the equation. She was the director of community relations for the town of Grayford, a job that was 10% charity and 90% perception management. She ensured the Vale name was synonymous with generosity, vision, and community. Together, they had crafted the perfect family narrative, and in that narrative, Harper, the dreamer, the charismatic one, was the star. I, the analyst, the quiet one, was the stage manager. It started before we could even drive. In 10th grade, Harper had a vision for the school's spring fundraiser, a boho chic music festival, she'd announced at dinner. My parents had called it innovative. For the next 2 months, Harper spent her time picking out color palettes for the Instagram announcements and auditioning local bands who played bad acoustic covers. I spent my nights in a silent, buzzing panic. I was the one building the Excel models for ticket pricing. I was the one on the phone with 3 different rental companies, negotiating contracts for the stage, the lighting, and the portable toilets. I was the one who discovered our school's insurance didn't cover outdoor events and spent 72 hours with a borrowed textbook, drafting a liability waiver for every attendee to sign. The event was a success. The local paper ran a photo of Harper on stage, accepting a check, her hair backlit by the setting sun. The caption read, "Harper Vale, a natural leader, turns vision into reality." My parents had the article framed. That night, I was in the parking lot with a flashlight, making sure the rental company's truck didn't crush the sprinkler system, a task my father had assigned me to make sure the details are handled. That was the night I learned the difference between vision and reality. Vision got the applause, reality got the paperwork. The lesson was driven home, brutally. In our first year of college, I was drowning in a quantitative methods course, and as a final project, I built a minimum viable product, a raw but functional algorithm that could forecast consumer demand for boutique CPG products based on scraping and analyzing social media sentiment. It was complex, ugly, and it worked. I was proud of it. I showed it to Harper over winter break. "Wow, arty," she'd said, her eyes glazing over as I explained the code. "Super, technical, cool." 2 weeks later, my mother emailed me a link to a live feed. "Watch your sister. She's a finalist in the university startup pitch." I watched, my stomach turning to ice. There was Harper, on stage, in front of a venture capital panel, and on the screen behind her were my charts, my data, my logic, all repackaged in a sleek, teal-colored slide deck. "The old way is broken," she said, her voice ringing with a passion she had never earned. "My vision is a predictive engine, an emotional algorithm. We don't just see what people buy, we see what they want." She didn't understand the math. She couldn't have explained a single line of the code, but she was brilliant at pitching the feeling of it. She won second place and a $10,000 seed grant. My parents took her to Stonebrook Grill to celebrate. I was in the library, failing my original course because my final project, according to my professor, bore a striking resemblance to a pitch competition entry that has already received significant press. I never confronted her. I never confronted any of them. I'd learned my lesson at the Boho Chic fundraiser. You cannot win an argument against a narrative. They didn't care about the truth. They cared about the story. So, I changed my strategy. I stopped arguing. I started documenting. I became a meticulous archivist of my own life. I saved every email. I screenshotted every text message. When I handled the logistics for another one of Harper's ventures, a failed athleisure brand, I made her sign a simple, one-page service agreement I drafted. When I paid the deposit for her first supplier, I did it from a dedicated bank account, and I kept the wire transfer receipt. I took my old code, refined it, registered it under a sole proprietorship, and had the core components legally notarized with a timestamp. I learned to be silent. I learned to keep records. I learned that in the world of finance and PR my parents had built, the only thing that beats a good story is a legally binding document. Our high school graduation was the dress rehearsal for tonight. It was the same script, smaller budget. We stood by the garage. My father tossed Harper a small, silver box. Inside was a key, parked in the driveway, wrapped in a giant red bow, was a brand new Mini Cooper. The future needed to be mobile. He then turned to me and clapped me on the shoulder. He handed me a leather-bound copy of The Intelligent Investor. "Arden," he'd said, "we're so proud of your discipline. You're going to make a fantastic analyst. Go get a good, safe job at a bank. Build a foundation." A car for her, a lecture for me, an asset versus a piece of advice. And so, tonight at the Stonebrook Grill, as I watched that $100,000 envelope slide across the table, I felt nothing but a cold, tired sense of recognition. They were just running the play again. The numbers were bigger, but the roles were identical. The only difference, this time, was the audience. In the corner of the restaurant, near the bar, a small tripod held a discreet video camera. A small laminated sign on the hostess stand read, "Welcome, graduates. Tonight, Stonebrook Grill is live streaming our celebration moments for the Westvale Community Access Channel." My mother, the PR director, had arranged it. Of course, a perfect, manufactured moment of local interest. The Vales, nurturing the next generation of Westvale entrepreneurs, all of it captured on tape, all of it public. I could picture the scene I had just left. The lava cake would have arrived. Harper, high on the $100,000 and 2 glasses of champagne, would be leaning forward, her eyes bright. "I'm telling you all," she'd be promising, her voice loud enough for the camera's microphone. "Halo Sip is going to fly. We'll be in every health store in the state by Christmas. We're on track for a Series A funding round in 6 months. 6 months. Just watch. 6 months." I sat in my car, parked in the dark lot of the Vireo Ledger office, 183 days. I sipped from the bottle of water in my cup holder. I thought about the number. It wasn't just a random projection from Harper. It was a deadline. It was the precise, non-negotiable term listed in the fine print of the supply contract with the glass bottle manufacturer. The contract I now owned. The contract that stated if Halosip LLC failed to secure its next round of funding, a Series A, within 183 days of its initial seed investment, the secured party had an immediate, unilateral option. An option to accelerate all outstanding debt, an option to reject any new financing, an option to trigger a default, an option to take control. My family was perfect. They were the perfect image of success, philanthropy, and forward-thinking vision, a perfect family, on paper. They just forgot one thing. Paper is my world. By day, I am a control analyst at Northline Capital. To my family, this is my badge of failure. It is the real job my mother insisted upon, the safe path my father advised. They imagine me in a gray cubicle, a cog in a vast machine, auditing spreadsheets for rounding errors. They call it my desk job, with a faint, pitying smile. They are, as usual, completely wrong. Northline is one of the largest private equity firms in the state. My desk job is not about rounding errors. I work in the portfolio operations group. My team is the scalpel. When Northline acquires a new company, we are the ones sent in to find the waste, the fraud, and the contractual cancers hidden in the balance sheets. I don't just audit numbers, I audit systems. I trace the flow of money, data, and liability. I am paid, and paid very well, to find the single, overlooked clause in a 400-page contract that can save the firm $10 million. My desk job has made me an expert in corporate anatomy. I know exactly where to press to find the nerve, and I know exactly how much pressure to apply. By night, I am the founder, CEO, and sole employee of Vireo Ledger. Vireo is my real company. It has no flashy logo, no venture capital, and no glass-link profile. Its business is simple, quiet, and brutal. Vireo Ledger buys distressed commercial debt. When a small business is failing and can't pay its suppliers, those suppliers are left holding worthless invoices. Accounts receivable they'll likely have to write off. They are desperate for cash. I am happy to provide it. Vireo buys those invoices, those debts, for pennies on the dollar. This is the venture I proposed on graduation night, the one my father called a failure. He didn't understand the model. "You want to buy failure?" he'd asked, confused. "I want to buy leverage," I'd answered. He didn't get it, so he gave his money to HaloSip. Harper's functional beverage startup was a perfect case study in everything I hunt at Northline. It was a bonfire of cash. She'd spent the entire $100,000 in less than 60 days, primarily on a high-gloss marketing campaign, a celebrity endorsement from a minor reality TV star, and a corner office suite she didn't need. What she wasn't spending it on were her COGS, her cost of goods sold. I knew, because I had already identified her critical path suppliers. A company like HaloSip is a three-legged stool: the proprietary and likely worthless formula, the glass bottle, and the sterile, vacuum-sealed cap. Without the bottle and cap, she has no product. She just has sticky juice in a vat. Her suppliers were Westvale Glassworks and Sterile Cap Solutions. Both were small, regional players, exactly the kind of vendors who get bullied by flashy, high-growth clients. Harper, using the Vale name, had demanded net 90 payment terms, and now she was late. On day 91, I made my move. I did not approach them as Arden Vale. I operated through Grey Quill SPV, a special purpose vehicle I'd established through my attorneys, funded by Vireo Ledger. Grey Quill was a sterile, anonymous entity. It was just a name on a wire transfer. The suppliers were nervous. They were calling HaloSip and getting voicemail. They were emailing Harper and getting no response. Grey Quill SPV offered them a lifeline. "This invoice for $75,000 is 90 days past due," my offer letter stated. "We will assume this debt and wire you $30,000 within the hour. 30 cents on the dollar, cash in hand, versus a 100% loss from a defunct startup." They both signed within a day, just like that. Vireo Ledger, through its SPV, became HaloSip's secured creditor. I owned her debt. But owning the debt was just the first step. The leverage was in the paperwork. Harper, in her rush to get her bottles, had signed the supplier's standard agreements without reading them. I had read them. I'd read them 3 times before I even formed Grey Quill. Deep in the terms and conditions, in boilerplate language she'd ignored, was a clause. It stated that in the event of non-payment, the supplier retained the right to file a UCC-1 financing statement, securing their interest not just in the goods provided, the bottles and caps, but in all inventory derived therefrom and all ancillary intellectual property related to the fulfillment of said goods. Ancillary intellectual property, the brand, the logo, the formula. The morning after graduation, I had my legal team file that UCC-1 with the Secretary of State. It was a public record. I was now first in line. If HaloSip went bankrupt, I got paid before anyone, before the marketing agency, before the landlord, before any equity investors, including, and especially, Vale Holdings. My next move was to retain a different law firm, a much larger, much more expensive one in Norcrest. Their job was not to act, but to watch. I gave them one target: Vail Holdings' credit agreement with HaloSip. I knew my father. He wouldn't just give Harper $100K in equity, he'd have Vail Holdings extend her a revolving line of credit. It was how he controlled things. I was looking for two words: cross-default. It's the most beautiful tripwire in corporate finance. A cross-default clause states that if the debtor, HaloSip, defaults on any other loan, they are automatically in default on this loan. My Norcrest lawyers confirmed it. The Vail Holdings credit line had a hair-trigger cross-default clause. The moment Harper officially defaulted on my debt, the debt she didn't even know I owned, she would simultaneously default on my father's. Every email from my system was another brick in the bridge. Subject: HaloSip, LLC, 120 days in arrears. Notice of breach. That was a foundation piling. Subject: HaloSip, LLC, 150 days in arrears. Final demand. That was the asphalt. I was building a 4-lane highway straight to her front door. I don't want to make HaloSip collapse. A bankruptcy is messy, prolonged, and unpredictable. The assets get frozen. Judges get involved. It's a blunt instrument. I'm a control analyst. I prefer a scalpel. I don't want to destroy her. I want her to transfer. I want her, and my parents, to willingly, publicly, and contractually sign the entire company over to me. They think they opened a door for her with a $100,000 check. I'm just going to be the one who stands at the exit when the fire alarm goes off. And I'm the one who pulled the alarm. The entire time, my sister was my greatest unwitting accomplice. She was documenting her own fraud in real time. Her GlassLink profile was a masterpiece of self-delusion, a photo of her at a long, polished table, laughing with her new marketing team. Caption: Building the dream. So blessed to have this team on the HaloSip journey. Big announcement soon. CEO Life Female Founders, Disrupt. I right-clicked. Save as. I checked the timestamp. 2:14 p.m. that same day. At 2:00 p.m. my system had registered a payment declined notice from her bank. Another photo, a close-up of a single bottle of HaloSip, glistening with condensation. Caption: We're scaling. Q3 is going to be explosive. Get ready for the wellness revolution. I saved it. The metadata showed the photo was taken at her leased office in Norcrest, the same office where the eviction notices were being sent. These weren't just social media posts. They were public-facing statements. They were material misrepresentations to the market, to investors, and most importantly, to creditors. Every like she received was another witness to the lie. They had called my job a desk job. They had called my idea a failure. They failed to understand that in the modern world, the desk is the battlefield. They thought I was stuck in a cubicle. I was in a command center, and all my assets were finally in position. The time for quiet accumulation was over. It was time to put the first document on the table. My legal team, acting on behalf of Gray Quill SPV, drafted the Notice of Assignment. It was a simple, brutal, 2-page document. It was not a request. It was a statement of fact. It informed HaloSip, LLC, and all associated parties that the debts previously owed to Westvale Glassworks and Sterile Cap Solutions, totaling $142,000, were now, legally and irrevocably, the property of Gray Quill SPV. We sent 2 copies via certified mail. Return receipt requested, one to the struggling corner office suite leased by HaloSip, the other to the gleaming headquarters of Vail Holdings, addressed directly to my father's chief financial officer. I needed the signature. I needed the proof of receipt. A week later, the green signature cards returned. The first was signed by Harper's harried office manager, who had likely filed it under vendor disputes and forgotten about it. The second was signed, in sharp, precise blue ink, by the CFO of Vail Holdings. They knew, but they didn't understand. To them, Gray Quill was just another factor, a bottom feeder in the debt market. It was a nuisance, not a threat. They had received the notice, but they hadn't read the fine print. With the 2 primary suppliers secured, I moved on the third. HaloSip wasn't just bottles and caps. Someone had to actually mix the functional slurry and package it. That was Pure Blend Logistics, a regional co-packer, and they, too, were owed a small fortune, $120,000, now 112 days past due. I approached Pure Blend's owner differently. I didn't just offer cash. I provided proof of risk. I sent him an anonymized, heavily redacted copy of my UCC-1 filing. Look, the document screamed, I am the senior secured creditor. I have first lien on all inventory. When this ship sinks, I get the lifeboats, the engines, and the navigation maps. You will be at the bottom of the ocean. The owner, terrified of a total loss, folded immediately. He sold me his $120,000 in receivables at a 62% discount. He got $45,600 wired that afternoon. I got the final piece of the puzzle. And this contract was the true prize. Harper, in her haste, had signed Pure Blend's master service agreement without legal review. I had a copy. I knew Article 9 of that agreement by heart. It wasn't boilerplate. It was a weapon. It explicitly stated that in the event of default exceeding 90 consecutive days, all assets related to production, including but not limited to process formulas, proprietary blend data, trade secrets, and associated brand assets, would be subject to immediate lien and transfer to the secured party. She hadn't just collateralized her physical inventory. She had collateralized the idea of Halo SIP itself. Owning the debt gave me rights. Specifically, the right to inspect my collateral. Halo SIP's inventory wasn't in their expensive office. It was sitting in a third-party logistics warehouse in West Ridge, an industrial park smelling of diesel exhaust and damp cardboard. I scheduled a surprise audit of the inventory. I cited my rights as the secured party for the Westvale Glassworks and Pure Blend contracts. Harper, on the phone, sputtered about trade secrets and proprietary processes. My lawyer, on the same call, politely informed her that refusing the inspection would constitute an immediate act of default, allowing us to seize the assets today. She backed down. I didn't go myself. I sent a 3-person inspection team from a quality assurance firm Vireo keeps on retainer. They were polite, professional, and carried clipboards and digital calipers. They weren't just there to count the bottles. They were there to execute a failure test protocol I had personally designed. The report landed on my desk 24 hours later. It was beautiful. They had randomly sampled 500 units from Batch C, the most recent production run. The bottles were fine. The caps were the problem. The sterile cap contract specified, in minute detail, a vacuum seal integrity tolerance of 0.5% failure. My team's pressure test had found a 7% failure rate. 7% of her product was potentially unsterile. This was the pivot. This was the moment the game changed. It was no longer a simple matter of non-payment. It was a material breach of the quality assurance clause in her original supply agreement. It was a public safety risk. This breach triggered a new clause, a quality defect remediation clause. It allowed the secured party, me, to demand an immediate supplementary security deposit to cover the potential costs of a product recall and any associated consumer liability. I drafted the demand letter myself. It was not for the full debt. It was for a precise, calculated, and deeply awkward amount, $82,500. It was due within 48 business hours. I sent the demand via email and courier to both Halo SIP and Vail Holdings. This time, the panic was immediate. $82,500 was not a vendor problem. It was a crisis. I watched the clock. The 48-hour window closed at 5 p.m. on a Friday. My phone remained silent. 4:58 p.m. 4:59 p.m. At 5:01 p.m., my inbox pinged. An email from my father's CFO, sent to the generic accounting address at Greyquill SPV. Subject: Urgent. Halo SIP. Deposit request. To whom it may concern, Vail Holdings is processing the wire transfer for the requested deposit. Please be advised that due to the Federal Reserve's holiday schedule, the funds may be delayed and will not post to your account until Monday morning. Regards. A bank holiday, the oldest, lamest excuse in the financial playbook. And it was the most beautiful string of words I had ever read. It was an admission, in writing, that they could not meet the 48-hour deadline. It was a technical default. At 5:02 p.m., I forwarded that email to my legal team in Norcrest with a one-word instruction: execute. They didn't miss a beat. The late payment, even by one business day, even with an excuse, was a technical breach of my Gray Quills agreement. And because of the cross-default clause my lawyers had found in the Vail Holdings credit line, the second Halo SIP defaulted on my loan. It automatically, instantly, defaulted on my father's. The trap snapped shut. Vail Holdings' entire credit line, the one keeping Halo SIP alive, was now, by the terms of its own contract, frozen. My father, by trying to stall me, had inadvertently frozen his own assets. He had given me the gun, and he had just pulled the trigger on himself. With Halo SIP now in technical default on all fronts, the gloves were off. I instructed my lawyers to file a UCC-3 amendment. A UCC-1 just claims collateral. A UCC-3 amends that claim. We expanded the collateral description from inventory and ancillary assets to a list so specific it left no room for legal interpretation. We attached a multi-page addendum, Exhibit A. It listed the Halo SIP trademark registration number, the domain name, halosip.com, the specific proprietary process formulas derived from the Pure Blend contract, the customer lists from their failed launch, the GlassLink social media handles. I wasn't just claiming the bottles, I was claiming the brand. The paper trail was no longer a trail, it was a steel cage, and I had just locked the door. My phone buzzed, a text from my lead attorney at the Norcrest firm. It was 5 words. You now have the lever. He was right. I could initiate foreclosure. I could seize the assets. I could liquidate the entire company in a private, secured party sale and wipe her off the map. I could destroy Halo SIP in the dark. But I remembered graduation night, the public humiliation, the camera in the corner, the thin smile and the word failure. Destruction wasn't the point. Justice was, and justice, as my mother, the PR director, well knew, requires an audience. I texted him back. Not yet. The stage first. I opened my corporate email at Northline Capital, my real job. An invitation had been sitting in my inbox for a week, forwarded by my department head. It was from Vail Holdings. My mother had pulled strings to get Northline to attend as a community partner, a way to show off her family's success to my employers. Vail Holdings cordially invites you and a guest to our annual Founders Day all-hands meeting. Join us as we celebrate the future of Westvale Enterprise and showcase our commitment to innovation. It was scheduled for 3 weeks from today, in the main conference hall of the Norcrest Tower. I scrolled down. An agenda was attached, and there it was, the keynote speaker for the 10:00 a.m. slot. Harper Vail, CEO of Halo SIP, on building the future of wellness. They weren't just giving her a stage, they were giving me one. The paper trail didn't just bite back, it was about to perform. The 28th floor of the Norcrest Tower was a cathedral of glass and steel, designed to make you feel small and ambitious at the same time. The ceiling was 3 stories high, and the western wall was a solid pane of glass overlooking the sprawl of Westvale below. It was a room built for pronouncements. The air was filled with the artificial sounds of pre-conference mingling, the low hum of 100 quiet conversations, the clink of ceramic coffee cups, and periodically, the sharp, disembodied bark of the sound tech at the back. Check. Check. 1. Check. The voice echoed, too loud, making people flinch. This was my father's stage, and everything had to be perfect. He and my mother were working the room, a flawless tag team. He, in his dark, authoritative suit, was shaking hands with the bankers from Northline, my colleagues. She, in a sapphire blue dress, was gliding. Her arm linked with the editor of the Westvale Local, pointing out the features of the room. I overheard her. We just feel it's so important to nurture young entrepreneurs right here, she was saying, her voice pitched with earnest community pride. This isn't just a Vale Holdings event. It's a celebration of West Vale's future. The local news camera was panning across the room, capturing the custom-printed banners. Vale Holdings, investing in tomorrow's vision. My mother had ensured the narrative was set before a single word was spoken. And then there was the star. Harper was holding court by the stage. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit that looked like it had been tailored by a sculptor. It was sharp, modern, and screamed female founder. A discreet, black lapel microphone was already clipped to her jacket. She was laughing, a bright, confident sound, as a small circle of junior analysts hung on her every word. She looked like the cover of a magazine. She looked like the future. I was in the back, near the catering table. I was dressed in my standard Northline Capital work uniform, a charcoal gray suit, a white silk shell, and low heels. My clothes were expensive, precise, and utterly forgettable. I was invisible. I blended perfectly into the background of auditors and compliance officers my firm had sent to show support. I held a lukewarm coffee cup as camouflage. My 5-minute slot on the agenda had been laughably easy to secure. 3 weeks ago, I had emailed the event coordinator, a junior PR person from my mother's office. Subject: Agenda Edition, Founders Day. Ms. Davies, per my department head at Northline, I will be attending. I would like to request a 5-minute lightning talk. Topic: A case study in proactive supply chain debt management. I can provide a brief overview of best practices for mitigating vendor risk. It was the most boring, jargon-filled, coma-inducing title I could invent. It sounded like homework. They had approved it within the hour, probably desperate to add some technical credibility to the agenda. They'd slotted me in right after Harper, assuming I'd be the palate cleanser. On the massive 40-foot LED screen above the stage, the agenda looped. 9:45 a.m. Welcome. Richard Vale, CEO, 10:03 a.m. Keynote. Halo Sip, From Kitchen to Market. Harper Vale, CEO, 10:15 a.m. Case Study, SCM Debt Management, Arden Vale, Northline Capital. My name was there, a footnote to hers. Earlier that morning, before the room filled, I'd found the AV tech. I handed him a black USB drive. Just 3 slides for my SCM talk, I'd said, my voice flat. And there's one PDF attachment in the folder labeled Exhibit A. Could you just make sure that's queued up for the MC's prompter? It's just his reference notes. The tech, juggling 3 headsets, hadn't even looked at me. Yeah, 3 slides, 1 PDF for the prompter, got it. He hadn't opened the file. The MC, a local radio host whose suit was too shiny, hadn't read it. It was a technical file for a technical talk. It was just noise. I reached into the inner pocket of my blazer. My fingers brushed against the stiff, cold paper of a business-sized envelope. It was gray, with a linen finish. It was the kind of stationery used for condolences or very, very bad news. Inside, sealed, were 3 copies of the Notice of Default and Immediate Demand for Payment, formally executed by the Norcrest law firm on behalf of Gray Quill SPV. It was a declaration of war, packaged as a memo. The house lights dimmed. The ambient hum of the crowd quieted. The MC stepped into the spotlight. "Good morning, Westvale," he boomed, his voice radiating false energy. "Welcome to the Vale Holdings Founders Day." Polite applause. My father gave his speech, full of words like synergy and legacy and future. He spoke of Vale Holdings as a family, as a force for good. And no one represents that future, he concluded, his voice thickening with real, genuine pride. Better than the next generation. It is my honor to introduce the founder and CEO of Halo Sip, my daughter, Harper Vale. The applause was warmer this time. As Harper moved toward the stage, my mother intercepted her, a perfectly staged, silent moment for the cameras. Eleanor reached up, brushed a non-existent piece of lint from Harper's cream-colored shoulder, and then smoothed her hair back, cupping her cheek for just a second. Her eyes, my mother's eyes, were dazzling with a fierce, blinding pride. It was the look of an artist who has finally, finally unveiling her masterpiece. The local news camera zoomed in, capturing the tender, powerful image. The matriarch, the heiress, the narrative was complete. I stood in the shadows. I watched the scene, not as a daughter, but as a control analyst. I took one, slow, calibrated breath. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel jealousy. I felt quiet. I felt the cold, hard click of a machine engaging. My hand brushed the envelope in my pocket. The memory of the damp napkin from the Stonebrook Grill surfaced, sharp and clear. The single word I had written. Teacher. The lesson was about to be called to order. Harper took the stage. She was radiant under the bright, hot spotlights. She owned the space, her smile wide, her confidence filling the room. She tapped the lectern, and the small sound was a boom. "Thank you, Dad, and thank you all," she began. Her voice was silk. "It's an honor to be here, on Founders Day, to share the journey of Halo Sip." She clicked. Her first slide appeared on the massive screen, a glossy, beautiful product shot, bottles glistening with studio condensation. "The journey has been incredible," she said, pacing slightly. "A whirlwind, from a simple idea in my kitchen to a brand that is ready to revolutionize the wellness space." She leaned forward, conspiratorially, drawing the audience in. "But what's more incredible is the future. We've weathered the startup storms. We've streamlined our logistics. We've optimized our production, and I am thrilled." She paused, her smile widening. "To be the first to announce today, we are on track to be profitable next quarter." The lie landed. It hung in the air, amplified, broadcast, and captured by the press camera. Profitable, a material statement, a public declaration, a demonstrable falsehood. The MC, beaming, began to applaud. My father, in the front row, nodded, his face a mask of profound paternal satisfaction. The word echoed in my head. Profitable. The teacher had just called my name. Harper's lie. Profitable next quarter was still hanging in the air when the MC stepped back to the lectern. His face split with a pasted-on grin. The applause for her was warm, and my father, in the front row, was leading it, his eyes fixed on his star. "Wow. Thank you, Harper. From kitchen to market. What an inspiring journey," the MC boomed. "That is the kind of vision we are here to celebrate." He glanced at his teleprompter, a flicker of confusion, then resignation, crossed his face. He had to get through the boring part. "And now," he said, his voice dropping an octave in energy, "speaking of the nuts and bolts of these journeys, we have a quick case study on supply chain debt management. Please welcome, from Northline Capital, Arden Vale." Polite, scattered, obligatory applause. A few of my colleagues from Northline clapped dutifully. I saw my father whisper something to my mother, who simply stared ahead, her celebratory smile frozen in place, not even bothering to look at me. I moved from the shadows at the back of the room. My footsteps were silent on the thick conference carpet. I walked past the front row. I did not look at my family. I did not look at Harper, who was stepping off the stage, still glowing, accepting a pat on the arm from the MC. I stepped onto the low stage. It was hot, the lights designed to make one person brilliant and everyone else invisible. I went to the lectern. The MC had moved to the side, checking his phone. "Thank you," I said. My voice was low, flat. The AV tech, caught off guard, fumbled with the levels, a brief, high-pitched squeal of feedback. "Check," I said into the microphone. It boomed, clear and cold. The tech stabilized it. "My topic is cash flow insolvency in CPG startups." I clicked the remote. My first slide appeared on the 40-foot screen. It was exactly what they expected. It was the most boring slide I could have possibly designed. A complex, multi-layered cash flow diagram, arrows and boxes, labeled with acronyms: DSO, Days Sales Outstanding, DPO, Days Payable Outstanding, CCC, Cash Conversion Cycle. There were no logos, no brand names, just anonymous, academic metrics. I saw the Northline contingent settle in, pulling out their phones. My father looked at his watch. As we can see, I began, my voice the monotone of a tenured professor. A negative cash conversion cycle is often mistaken for profitability, but if DPO is artificially extended past 120 days, the corresponding account's payable liability creates a severe solvency risk. I was speaking, but I wasn't watching the audience. I was watching the main entrance. Right on cue, the massive glass doors at the back of the auditorium swooshed open. It wasn't a subtle entrance. The man was required, by law, to make his presence known. He was tall, wearing a nondescript windbreaker, and he held a thick, letter-sized clipboard. He was a court-appointed process server. He was the neutral hand of the law. He walked with a steady, unhurried pace up the center aisle. He was not intimidated by the glass and steel, or the suits, or the name Vale on the banners. He had a job. A low murmur started. Heads turned. People in the aisle seats leaned away from him as he passed. My father, in the front row, turned, his face dark with annoyance at the interruption. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a low growl. "This is a private event." The server did not look at him. He was looking at the stage, at the lectern, at the name badges. His eyes found the MC. He found Harper, who was standing at the side of the stage, glowing with her own success, and he found me. He walked up the short stairs to the stage. The MC, finally looking up from his phone, stepped forward. "Sir, can I help you? This is a..." The server handed him the first gray envelope from his clipboard. "You are served," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. He then turned to Harper. Her smile was gone, replaced by a look of utter childlike confusion. "Harper Vale?" She just stared. "You are served," he said, handing her the second gray envelope. He then turned to the front row. He scanned the name badges. He found his target. Marcus Thorne, Chief Financial Officer, Vale Holdings. My father's CFO, a man I'd known my whole life, looked up, his face pale. "Yes?" The server leaned over the stage and placed the final envelope in his hand. "You are served." His job was done. He turned, walked off the stage, down the center aisle, and out the glass doors, which swooshed shut behind him, leaving a vacuum of pure, stunned silence. The whole interruption took less than 30 seconds. The room was frozen. Harper was holding the gray envelope as if it were a dead animal. The MC was staring at the CFO. Marcus was already breaking the seal, his hands shaking. I leaned back toward the microphone. My first slide, the boring cash flow model, was still glowing on the massive screen behind me. As I was saying, I continued, my voice cutting through the silence. Solvency risk becomes a legal default when certain covenants are breached, specifically when a cross-default is triggered. Harper looked up at me, her face a mask of dawning horror. The secured parties may, at their discretion, enforce their rights. And I clicked the remote. My boring slide vanished. In its place, projected 40 feet wide, was a new slide. It wasn't a slide at all. It was the PDF I had labeled Exhibit A. It was a collage of scanned documents. It was ugly, bureaucratic, and undeniable. On the left, the unmistakable letterhead of the West Vale Secretary of State, the red filed stamp over the UCC1 financing statement, the debtor, Halo SIP, LLC, the secured party, Gray Quill SPV. In the center, copies of the certified mail receipts, the green cards, one signed by Harper's office manager, the other, in sharp blue ink, by Marcus Thorne, CFO. On the right, a series of damning email screenshots, blown up for all to see. Subject, 120 days in arrears. Subject, 150 days in arrears. Final demand. And at the very top, the final beautiful email from Marcus Thorne. Due to the Federal Reserve's holiday schedule, the funds may be delayed. The room erupted. It wasn't a shout. It was a single, collective gasp, followed by a wave of sharp, hissing whispers, the sound of 100 people talking at once but trying not to be heard. The sound system, still hot, picked up every noise. A sharp click, and my mother's voice, amplified by her still live lapel mic, shot through the speakers. "Richard, what is this?" Her voice wasn't the smooth PR matriarch. It was a raw, panicked squawk. My father grabbed her arm. "Turn it off," he hissed. All eyes went to Harper. She was sheet white, her cream-colored suit suddenly looking like a shroud. She forced a laugh. It was a high, thin, terrible sound. "This is," she stammered, looking at the MC, at her father, at the camera. "This is just a misunderstanding. A simple vendor thing. Arden, what are you doing?" I looked away from her. I looked away from my parents, who were staring at me, their faces a portrait of disbelief and rage. I looked directly into the black, empty lens of the local news camera at the back of the room. I spoke, not to my sister, not to my family, but to the audience, to the public. "It's not a misunderstanding. Harper," I said, my voice clear and cold. "It's math." In the dead, ringing silence that followed, a single sound echoed through the room, captured perfectly by the oversensitive microphones. A waiter, frozen by the drama near the catering table, dropped a metal spoon. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp, piercing clatter. It sounded final, like a gavel, like a period at the end of a sentence. The clatter of the dropped spoon echoed and died, leaving a silence that was heavier and more absolute than before. The only sound was the low hum of the projector. Holding Exhibit A on the screen, a 40-foot monument to my sister's incompetence and my family's willful ignorance, I adjusted the microphone, and the small sound made half the room jump. Under Article 9 of the Uniform Commercial Code, as adopted by this state, I began, my voice as calm and clinical as if I were still giving my case study. A secured party has specific rights upon default. I was no longer Arden Vale, the daughter, the failure. I was Arden Vale, the analyst from Northline Capital, the lecturer, the voice of the machine. "These rights are simple and they are total," I continued, pacing one step away from the lectern, claiming the stage. "The secured party, in this case, Greyquill SPV, may seize the collateral, they may sell the collateral, or they may transfer the collateral, in what is termed a commercially reasonable manner, to satisfy the outstanding debt." I pointed to the screen. "This is not a lawsuit. This is not a negotiation. It is a foreclosure. This is the legal and binding collection of assets. These are the contracts. These are the receipts. This," I said, tapping the final email from the CFO, "is the default." A raw, choked sound came from the side of the stage. It was Harper. Her face was a ruin, a mask of total, narcissistic disbelief. Tears were streaking her makeup. "You," she choked out, her voice a desperate, childish wail. "You're doing this to me? Arden? You're doing this to your sister?" She emphasized the word "me," as if it were a sacred shield, as if our shared blood was a legal defense. I stopped. I looked at her. For the first time, I looked at her directly. There was no pity in my eyes. There was no anger. There was only the cold, clear void of an accounts ledger being balanced. "No," I said, my voice dropping, forcing the microphones to strain. "Your contracts are... you signed them." That was the line. The room broke. "Stop this!" a man's voice roared from the front row. It was David Roth, the lead counsel for Vale Holdings, a man who had sent me birthday cards with $20 bills in them. He was on his feet, his face purple. "Stop this broadcast. Turn those cameras off. This is a private corporate matter, and you are all witness to tortious interference." The local news camera operator looked at his feed, then at the MC, his face a mask of panic. The MC lunged for the lectern mic. Folks, okay, I think that's all the time we have for this portion." I clicked the remote. "Mr. Roth," I said, cutting the MC off. "You'll want to stay for this, since you're the one who advised Harper to sign it." The screen changed. Exhibit A vanished. Exhibit B appeared. It was another scanned document, drier, denser, Master Service Agreement, Addendum 4B, Temporary Formula and Process Licensing. A collective groan came from the Northline legal contingent in the back. They knew exactly what this was. "This," I announced to the room, "is an agreement Harper signed 3 months ago with her co-packer, Pure Blend Logistics, to prevent them from suing her for non-payment. In it, she personally, as CEO, granted them a temporary royalty-free and, most importantly, transferable license to her proprietary formulas and blend data as a form of interim security." I pointed to the signature line, blown up on the screen, Harper's looping, arrogant signature. "She didn't just collateralize the bottles and the brand," I explained, letting the pedagogical tone return. "She collateralized the recipe. The debt I own from Pure Blend gives me the right to not only seize her formula, but to use it, or to sell it." My mother let out a low, guttural moan. This, she understood. This was the end of the vision. "So," I continued, "we have established default. We have established a comprehensive security interest in all assets, physical and intellectual, which brings us to today." I clicked the remote one last time. The final slide appeared. It was the simplest of all. It was white text on a black background. "Notice of assignment of security interest effective 8:00 a.m. Today's date. Assigner Greyquill SPV, LLC. Assignee Vireo Labs, Inc. As of this morning," I read, "Greyquill SPV, the holding company for these debts, executed a full and final sale of its entire security interest to a third party. Greyquill no longer has any claim on HaloSip." I let the words hang. I saw my father whisper to Roth, a flicker of hope in his eyes. A new, unknown third party. This they could fight. They could bury them in litigation. They could buy them out. "The new secured party," I said, "the new and sole owner of all claims against HaloSip, is Vireo Labs." I walked to the center of the stage, away from the lectern, into the clean, hot light. "Vireo Labs," I said, "is the company I proposed to my family on graduation night, the one my father called a failure, the one my mother called a daydream. Vireo Ledger buys the debt. Vireo Labs develops the assets." I let them connect the dots. I let them see the architecture. In the front row, my father stopped looking at his lawyer. He turned, very slowly, to my mother, who was staring at me, her face white, her mouth open. He said 2 words. They were not loud. They were not angry. They were a eulogy. They were dead as stones. "She set this up." I turned back to the audience, to the camera, my voice resonating with the full power of the sound system. "My father is a good teacher. He taught me that failure is an important lesson, so I studied his. I'm a control analyst. I don't like messy bankruptcies. I prefer clean exits." I looked at Harper. "I don't want to liquidate you. Harper, I want to save the jobs of the 60 employees you're about to put on the street with your profitable quarter." As the new, sole secured party, Vireo Labs has already negotiated a commercially reasonable disposition of all assets. I offered a way out. In fact, that way out is waiting. I paused and looked to the dark, soundproof door at the back of the stage, the one reserved for keynote speakers. "There's a buyer waiting outside." I nodded to the terrified AV tech. He fumbled, but hit the button. The electronic lock on the stage door gave a loud, definitive click thud. The door swung open. A woman walked through. She was in her late 40s, wearing a severe, impeccable dark gray Northline suit. This was not an auditor. This was not a community partner. This was Elizabeth Thorne, Managing Director of Northline Consumer Brands, the M&A division of my firm, my boss's boss. She was, quite simply, the most terrifying and respected operator in the building. She walked directly to the center of the stage, carrying a single, slim, leather-bound term sheet. She didn't look at my family. She didn't look at the press. She looked at me, gave a single, sharp, approving nod, and then turned to the stunned room. The predator had just entered the enclosure. Elizabeth Thorne did not just walk. She commanded the stage. She moved to the lectern, displacing me, and I stepped back. She was the authority now, the embodiment of a capital power far greater than my family's local influence. She placed her slim leather-bound term sheet on the lectern with a quiet, definitive thud. She did not look at my father, or my mother, or Harper. She looked first at the local news camera, then at the Northline Capital contingent at the back. She was performing for her audience. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was a low-pitched instrument of command, resonating with a clarity that cut through the panicked whispers. "I am Elizabeth Thorne, Managing Director of Northline Consumer Brands. My firm has been in negotiation with Vireo Labs." She gestured to me, a simple, non-familial acknowledgement, to acquire a certain distressed asset portfolio. "We have a binding offer. I believe Mr. Roth, Mr. Thorne, and Ms. Harper Vale have just received the legal prerequisites for this action." She seamlessly, brutally, connected the public service of the gray envelopes to her private offer. It was a pincer movement. "My colleague, Arden Vale," the word colleague struck my father like a physical blow, "has presented the clear legal basis for this foreclosure. Vireo Labs, as the sole secured party, has the right to liquidate the assets of HaloSip, LLC. They have chosen, instead, to execute a private, commercially reasonable sale. This is that offer." She didn't open the folder. She knew the terms by heart. She was here to dictate, not to negotiate. "The offer is straightforward. Northline Consumer Brands will acquire 100% of the assets of HaloSip, LLC, free and clear of all liens. This is an asset sale, not an equity sale. Vale Holdings' equity position is, as of this moment, valued at zero. Zero. The word was a gunshot in the quiet room. My father flinched. The entire vision, the $100,000, the belief, all of it, extinguished. "First," Elizabeth continued, "the price, Northline will pay $4.2 million in cash, to be wired upon signing." A collective, sharp intake of breath from the audience. $4.2 million. It sounded like a victory. A huge number. It was the sound of my family's name being validated. But they didn't understand the mechanics. Elizabeth let the number hang for a beat, then delivered the cut. "This payment will be made, in full, to the senior secured party, Vireo Labs, to satisfy the outstanding, defaulted senior debt, with all accrued penalties, legal fees, and quality assurance remediation costs. That debt totals $4,180,000. The room did the math. The whispers started again, this time with a different, more terrible understanding. $400,000 minus $4,180,000. "This leaves approximately $20,000, Elizabeth said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion, "which will be remitted to the debtor, HaloSip, LLC, as surplus, per statute. That is the total remaining book value of the company. The $100,000 gift, the Series A in 6 months, the CEO life, all of it, foreclosed on, packaged, and sold, leaving a remainder of $20,000. It wasn't just a failure, it was a rounding error. Second," she went on, her voice hardening, "the employees. This is the most critical point for Northline. This offer is contingent on the retention of all 60 non-executive employees at HaloSip and its direct co-packing facilities. Their tenure and their current salaries will be bridged. Their payroll will be funded by Northline. Effective today." This was my moment. I stepped forward, back into the circle of light, back to the microphone. "To be clear," I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence, "Northline's offer is the only thing preventing a full, immediate Chapter 7 liquidation. A liquidation that would have clawed back all assets and terminated every single employee. This agreement ensures that no one loses their job today. I looked at the small cluster of Halo SIP employees near the back of the room. They had been watching, pale with terror, as their professional lives evaporated. Now, their faces were a complex, agonizing mask of relief, confusion, and fear. They were saved, but their savior was the woman who had just publicly executed their founder. The PR mask, the community leader facade, was gone. My mother was half standing, her hand outstretched, her face crumpled in a way I had never seen. Her voice was a desperate, penetrating whisper that carried across the front rows, a sound of pure maternal panic. Arden, please, she was begging. Stop this. We can fix this. We can pay you. Arden, please. Family first. Family first. This was it. This was the weapon she had held over me my entire life. The guilt, the obligation, the unwritten law of the veils. I looked at her. The local news camera, sensing the real drama, panned slowly, capturing the image of the weeping matriarch. I nodded, my face a mask of solemn, terrible understanding. I looked at my mother, but I spoke into the microphone, to the room, to the camera. Exactly, I said. Family first. I gestured to the cluster of terrified employees in the back. Those 60 people have families, they have mortgages, they have children, they are a family, and as of today, they go first. My mother's own narrative, her community relations justification, turned back on her like a mirror. She crumpled back into her seat as if I had struck her. Harper, who had been catatonic, finally found her voice. It was not the confident CEO voice, it was the reedy, childish wail of my sister, the one who always got what she wanted. Arden, stop. Let's go to an office. Let's just talk about this. Please. We can talk about this in private. She wanted to take this off the stage. She wanted to pull me back into the dark, into the familiar dynamic of our childhood bedrooms, where her tears and her emotional appeals were the currency that mattered, where she could manipulate, and bargain, and cry, and win. I turned to her. I pointed, not at her. I pointed past her, to the back of the room, to the single, glowing red light of the local news camera. No, Harper, I said, my voice as cold and hard as the glass wall behind me. We began this in public. We end this in public. Third, Elizabeth Thorne said, stepping back in. She had allowed the family drama to play out for precisely 30 seconds. Now, the execution. This offer is conditional. Condition 1. Ms. Harper Vale and all representatives of Vale Holdings will resign from all operational, managerial, and board duties, effective immediately. Their access to all company systems, bank accounts, and facilities will be terminated as of this moment. A corporate beheading. Condition 2. A mutual non-disparagement and non-disclosure agreement will be signed by all parties. Vale Holdings, Mr. and Mrs. Vale, and Ms. Harper Vale will make no public statements, now or in the future, regarding this transaction or the events leading to it, outside of a pre-approved joint press release. The gag order. They weren't just taking the company, they were taking my family's story. David Roth, the Vale lawyer, was whispering frantically to my father. My father looked broken, shattered, but the CFO, Marcus Thorne, a man who lived by the numbers, stood up. His voice was shaking, but he had to try. Ms. Thorne, he said, addressing Elizabeth, this is an aggressive proposal. Vale Holdings is prepared to make a counteroffer to make the secured party whole. But the brand, the Halo SIP brand, it has value. It was built by this family. We insist on retaining the brand assets. It was a pathetic, last-ditch attempt. He was trying to salvage the one thing my mother and sister truly cared about, the name, the vision. I didn't let Elizabeth answer. I stepped to the lectern. Mr. Thorne, I said, and his eyes snapped to mine. As the filed UCC 3 amendment, which you received, clearly states, the collateral includes all brand assets, trademarks, and associated intellectual property. The brand is not yours to retain. It was forfeit the moment you defaulted. It is the primary asset being sold. He sat down, defeated. This is the offer, Elizabeth said, her voice final. It is a commercially reasonable disposition of assets, as required by law, and it is the only offer that preserves the jobs of the employees. It is also, I must add, non-negotiable. She looked at the Northline legal counsel, who had been standing silently at the side. Mr. Davies, can you confirm Northline's position on the legality of this proceeding? Our lawyer stepped forward. Northline Capital has reviewed the filings by Greyquill SPV and Vireo Labs. The security agreements are ironclad. The UCC filings are perfected. The default is uncontested. This action and this subsequent asset sale are 100% in compliance with the Uniform Commercial Code and the laws of this state. It was over. The legal shield was up. Elizabeth Thorne produced an iPad from her leather folder. She signed the screen with a stylus, a clean digital signature. Northline has executed the term sheet, she announced. The $4.2 million is now in escrow, pending the corresponding signatures from the debtor, Ms. Vale, and the foreclosing party, Vireo Labs. She looked at me. I produced my own tablet. I countersigned. Arden Vale, CEO, Vireo Labs. All that was left was the final, formal surrender. A Northline lawyer, a woman I didn't know, walked over to a shaking, sobbing Harper and handed her an iPad. Ms. Vale, she said, her voice quiet but firm. This is the debtor's consent and release. It confirms you accept the terms of this sale and waive all future claims. If you do not sign, Northline's offer is withdrawn, and Vireo Labs will proceed with immediate, total liquidation, which, I assure you, will be far more painful for everyone. Harper looked at her father. He was staring at the floor. A man hollowed out. She looked at her mother. She was crying silently into her hands. Harper took the stylus. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely form the letter. She scribbled a jagged line. It was done. Elizabeth Thorne nodded, took the iPad, and looked at the audience. Thank you for your time. Northline Consumer Brands is excited to welcome the Halo Sip team. From the back, the cluster of employees, realizing in that instant that they had just been saved from unemployment, began to clap. It wasn't a celebration. It was a release of terror. The sound was strange, thin, and hesitant. It sounded like hail hitting a tin roof. The thin, reedy applause for the employees died, and the silence that rushed in to replace it was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and confidence out of the room. The only sound was the high, electronic whine of the hot audio equipment and the low, rattling hum of the tower's industrial air conditioning. The machinery of the day was done. All that was left was to sign the titles and close the books. Elizabeth Thorne, her face impassive, slid the first iPad across the lectern's polished surface. It wasn't a request. It was the next step in the procedure. This was the transfer I had pre-negotiated, the clean sale. My signature was needed to move the assets, the debt, the brand, the entire carcass of Halo Sip, from my company, Vireo Labs, to her division at Northline. My hand was steady. I picked up the cool, weighted stylus. The screen glowed. A box waiting for my name. I signed, Arden Vale. The digital ink flowed, clean and dry, a single, contractual line, a simple business transaction, the largest one of my career, executed in less than 2 seconds. I hit the accept button. The screen flashed. Processing, then complete. I had just been paid $4.18 million. At the same time, the Northline lawyer, the quiet, formidable woman, was standing over my sister. She held out the second iPad, the debtor's consent and release, the instrument of surrender. Harper, her entire body shaking, looked at the screen as if it were a death warrant. She looked at her father. He was no longer the CEO of Vale Holdings. He was just an old man, staring at the floor, his face gray. She looked at her mother. My mother was staring at me, her face a mask of such profound, venomous hatred that it was almost unrecognizable. There was no help there. "Ms. Vale," the lawyer said, her voice soft but inflexible. "We need your signature to stop the liquidation." Harper took the stylus, her hand, vibrating with sobs, could barely hold it. She tried to write her name. The tip of the stylus chattered against the glass. Tap, 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 tap. It was the only sound in the room. She finally pressed down, dragging the digital pen across the screen, leaving a jagged, incoherent scar of ink. It was less a signature and more a seismograph reading of her own collapse. She hit accept. The click was heavy, muffled. It was done. The story they had been writing for 2 decades, the one where she was the star, the visionary, the genius, had just been legally and publicly deleted. The room held its breath. The transaction was complete, but the human drama was not. The MC, the local radio host, saw his moment. His job was to create a narrative, and this one was spinning out of control. He fumbled, stepping forward, desperate to find a new angle, to put a button on the horror he had just witnessed. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mix of terror and journalistic awe. "Arden, Ms. Vale, my goodness," he stammered into his microphone, and his voice boomed over us all. This is quite a development." He gestured weakly from me to my family. "What? What changed? I mean, we all saw the photo. Graduation night. What changed since graduation night?" It was the question. The one question that mattered. The one question that bridged the 2 public moments. I let the silence stretch. I felt the hot white lights on my face. I felt the red eye of the news camera zoom in. "Nothing," I said. My voice was clear and cool. "Nothing changed." I paused. I listened to the teacher. The MC was confused. The teacher? The AV tech at the back, hearing a cue, fumbled with his slides. He probably thought I was referring to a professor. He clicked back, searching. He clicked past my Exhibit A, past my Exhibit B, past my boring cash flow slide. He clicked back to the looping Founders Day agenda that had been playing before my presentation. And there it was. Projected 40 feet high, for the entire room to see, was the image my mother had supplied for the community slideshow. It was the photo from the Stonebrook Grill. There was my father, his arm around Harper. There was my mother, beaming, holding the thick envelope. There was Harper, triumphant, holding the $100,000 check. Her face a sunburst of victory. And there I was. On the far right edge of the frame, half in shadow, my face was turned, slightly blurred, my back already angled away from the table. I wasn't part of the family portrait. I was an afterthought, an obstacle, a figure literally on the margins, about to be cropped out. I stood on the stage, in the shadow of the lectern. The hot light was just to my left. I watched the camera operator pan from the giant, dismissive image on the screen, and then zoom in, tight, on my face. I took one, single, deliberate step. I stepped out from behind the lectern. I stepped out of the shadow. I moved my body directly into the center of the clean, white, blinding spotlight. The heat was immediate, like a fever. I faced the camera. I faced the audience. I was no longer in the shadow. I was no longer on the edge. I was the only thing on the stage that was in focus. I had become the center of the frame. The MC, speechless, just stared. Elizabeth Thorne, however, was not. The performance was over. Business had resumed. She broke the tableau, walking directly to me, her hand extended. She did not smile. She did not congratulate. She acknowledged. "Welcome to the transition team, Ms. Vale," she said, her voice crisp. She shook my hand, once, a firm, dry grip. "Your analysis was correct. The liabilities were exactly where you said they'd be. We've confirmed the 7% cap failure rate. We're scrubbing the entire inventory. This was my $100,000 check. This was my validation, not a gift, not a dream, It was a confirmation of my work. "Thank you, Elizabeth," I said. "I've already mapped the payroll liabilities for the co-packer. They're in your inbox." I turned from her. I turned from my family. I looked at the cluster of Halo SIP employees in the back. They looked like battlefield survivors, blinking in the sudden, strange light of their own rescue. They were my responsibility now. I stepped to the microphone. "To everyone from the Halo SIP team," I said, my voice projecting, stripped of all emotions save one: authority. "My name is Arden Vale. I am leading the North Line transition. Let me be perfectly clear. Your jobs are secure. Your health insurance is uninterrupted. We start payroll continuity today. You will receive a full HR and operations briefing in your inboxes by noon." I gave them what I had never been given: certainty, a real job. I nodded to Elizabeth. Our work here was done. The lawyers were already gathering their papers. The show was over. We turned to leave the stage, to walk to the heavy, soundproof door at the back. "Arden." The sound was small, broken, a single word, barely audible, yet it cut through the room. It was my mother. I stopped. My back was to her. I did not turn. "Arden," she said again, louder this time. It was a raw, naked plea. It wasn't the PR director. It wasn't the matriarch. It was just a woman who had lost. "Arden, please, just look at me." The entire room held its breath. This was the last moment, the final thread. To turn was to acknowledge her. To look was to re-enter the family. To admit that her pain still had a claim on me. I stood there, my back to her, my shadow long on the stage. Behind me, I heard the sound of one of the Northline lawyers closing his briefcase. A sharp, definitive thwack of brass latches snapping shut. The sound of a file being closed. The sound of a case being finished. It was louder than her voice. I did not turn around. I walked toward the door. Elizabeth held it open for me. I stepped through the doorway, into the quiet, dim corridor beyond. The heavy metal-lined stage door swung shut behind me. The mechanism engaged with a final, heavy thud, the sound of a bolt sliding into place. It sealed the room. It sealed the story. It was a full stop. It was an exclamation point. The sound of the heavy stage door closing was absolute. It was a thud, final and deep, a sound of containment. The chaotic, panicked acoustics of the auditorium were sealed off. The corridor behind the stage was silent, cold, and carpeted in a deep, sound-dampening gray. Elizabeth Thorne was already yards ahead of me, her stride long and purposeful. Heading for the private executive elevators, I walked the other way, toward the public bank, my heels making no sound. I stepped out into the main atrium, the 28th floor. Once buzzing with my father's manufactured confidence, was now a void. The chatter was gone. The only people left were the catering staff, who were moving with a quiet, awkward urgency, packing away trays of untouched canapes and tiny, perfect pastries. The air felt thin and over-chilled. I walked across the expanse of polished marble. The only sound in the cavernous space was the sharp, lonely click, click, click of my own heels. I stopped in front of the main elevator bank. The doors were brushed steel, polished to a dull, perfect mirror. I stood there and looked at my reflection. It was just me, Arden Vale, a woman in a charcoal gray suit and a white silk shell, hair pulled back, face pale from the adrenaline, but composed. I looked, to all the world, like the desk job they'd assigned me. I looked practical. I looked stable. I looked grounded. But my eyes, in the reflection, were not the eyes of the girl in the graduation photo. They weren't blurred. They weren't on the edge of the frame. They were sharp. They were clear. They were the eyes of a person who had just spent a year meticulously building a cage and had finally, calmly closed the door. I watched my own reflection take a long, slow breath. The first breath I had taken all day that wasn't a weapon. My blazer pocket vibrated. Not a text, an alert. I pulled out my phone. The screen was bright in the dim lobby. A secure notification from the corporate trust account I had established for Vireo Labs. Alert. Incoming wire transfer. Batch ID 909A. Status. Received. Funds cleared. Amount. 4,180,000 Saojuans, USD. The number glowed on the screen. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't a vision fund. It wasn't a $100,000 check pushed across a table with a pitying smile. It was a payment. It was the result of a calculation. It was the precise, quantified, contractual value of their mistake, the price of the lesson they thought they were teaching me, paid in full, with interest. I didn't smile. I just read the numbers. The math was correct. My thumb, which had been perfectly steady when I signed the iPad, now had a faint tremor. The adrenaline was finally beginning to ebb, leaving that cold, shaky clarity of the aftermath. The work was not done. I tapped the screen, switching to my encrypted messenger, to the group chat with the Northline legal team. My message was 3 words. File employee retention letters. I hit send. That was the final lock. The letters, which I had drafted myself the night before, were now being auto-sent to all 60 employees. They legally and instantly transferred their employment from the smoldering crater of HaloSip, LLC, to the new Northline Consumer Brands entity. It was an iron wall. It protected them. It ensured my family, in their desperation, could not try to threaten them, or poach them, or use them as pawns. It ensured the people who had done the actual work were safe. Miss Vale? I looked up from my phone. The voice was young, reedy, and terrified. A man, hardly older than me, was standing about 20 feet away, clutching a cheap, laminated employee ID badge. I recognized him. He was one of the junior logistics coordinators from the back row. His eyes were red. I'm sorry to bother you, he stammered, taking a half step forward, then stopping, as if he'd hit an invisible wall. He was afraid of me. I just got it. The email, from HR, the retention letter. I nodded. You should have also received the onboarding packet and the call schedule for Monday. Yes, he said, his voice cracking. He took another step, driven by something stronger than his fear. I wanted to say, thank you. My wife, we just signed a lease on a new apartment, on Monday. We thought we had lost everything. I can keep my apartment. His face crumpled, not in sadness, but in a sudden, violent, full-body wave of relief. He wasn't looking at me like I was a monster. He wasn't looking at me like I was a hero. He was looking at me like I was the analyst who had just found and corrected the single, fatal error in the spreadsheet of his life. I allowed myself a small, tight smile. It wasn't the cold, patient smile from the restaurant. It was something new. You built the product, I said, my voice quiet. You keep the future. He nodded, unable to speak, and then, as if realizing he was holding his breath, he turned and practically ran toward the exit, clutching his ID badge, his new, secure life. I turned back to the polished steel doors. My gaze drifted across the vast, empty atrium. On the huge LED screens flanking the lobby, the ones that were supposed to be cycling through images of Vale Holdings' community partnerships, the presentation was still frozen. The AV tech, in the panic, had abandoned his post. The words still glowed in bright, optimistic, Vale blue font. Welcome to Founders Day. Founders Day. I stared at the first word, founder. It was the title Harper had worn like a costume. It was the role my father had tried to buy for her. It was the one word that encapsulated everything they had told me I was not. I said the word, so quietly that I could barely hear it myself. Just a breath against the steel. Found. I hadn't been given the title. I hadn't been anointed. I had found the leverage. I had found the flaws in the contracts. I had found the exit. I had found the precise mathematical path through their narrative. And in doing so, I had found myself, not the failure, not the ballast, not the girl on the edge of the frame. The founder. Ding! The sound was soft, melodic. The brushed steel doors in front of me slid open with a whisper of pressurized air, revealing an empty, wood-paneled car. I stepped forward. As I crossed the threshold, I glanced back, one last time, through the atrium's massive, floor-to-ceiling glass windows. I could see the reflection of the other giant screen, the one on the opposite wall. It was still frozen on the image from the presentation. The photo from graduation night. My father, triumphant. My mother, proud. Harper, holding her $100,000 check, her face a starburst of victory. And me, the blurred girl, half in shadow, on the absolute edge of the frame. I looked at the girl in the photo, and then I looked at my own reflection, centered, sharp, and clear, in the polished steel of the closing doors. I stepped inside. The air was cool and still. There was nothing left to say. I didn't need to go back for a final confrontation. I didn't need to hear my mother's apologies or my father's rage. Their entire story, the one they had written for me, was a flawed projection. It had been based on bad data. It was over. I didn't need their permission. I didn't need their explanation. The brushed steel doors slid shut with a soft, final whisper. Thank you for listening to this story. We'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. Please drop a comment below to share your thoughts and say hello. Don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and if you enjoyed this story, please support us by hitting that hype button so we can be heard by more people.